understand that you have not been attending. So this is very important. So before you leave, make sure you take, even if you're late, or especially if you're late. Yes?
Are you taking part of the lights, right?
Oh, that's a good question. Can I get back to you on that next week? You guys will know soon enough. And I know that we have our very last seminar, which is your presentation. That's what makes things more difficult. Coinciding with what may be described. And that's what, otherwise I would say probably yes. That's what made I went glad I went to actually take some time thinking. But you guys will know well in advance what will happen. And please don't shoot the messages.
You see,
Yeah. Of presenting your own stuff. Of course, I'm still going to be here and somewhat directing you. But this is our last step of summer to start. Next term, we resume in January when I'm going to be teaching another 2 set of seminars on trademark law again. But it was a nice break because today we're talking about something which some people would say is different, other people would say not quite, but most people don't seem to agree on what it actually means, which is geographical indications. And you guys probably realize this from your readings, because there are very different perspectives and very different opinions on what GIs are, what they are supposed to be, and what they're supposed to be doing or not doing. And it can also get quite political, if you guys, as you guys probably noticed from your readings as well. So, same thing as, this follows it pretty much the same or similar narrative to the other seminars that we have had. Essentially, our idea here is just to raise policy concerns and discussions when it comes to this particular legal concept of geographical indications. Why do we think it's relevant or not relevant? Why geographical indications should be protected and how? And what are the potential effects of or implications of any choice that we make when it comes to this? And this is pretty much evident when we think about the different means of protection for geographical indications across the globe. So if I protect this as sui generis rights, what does this mean in practice and how far can or should I go? Whereas if I choose something more like unfair competition or passing off, what are my limits and what should I do or make of this? So just to set the tone for our seminar today. And let me provoke you with this maybe hypothetical, maybe more real than fictional, let's see. But it's a real question. Let's put it this way. So, assuming Brexit, hopefully not, but assuming Brexit, we do have, the UK as a country has the option of pretty much deciding which way to pursue, as long as that is consistent with international obligations, which is something that we will also see. And then if you guys were to decide, if you were the decision makers, which way would you take? So should this be protected as sui generis rights, as trademark rights, or a variation thereof, or as something under passing off or unfair competition? Unfair competition is also missing here, sorry. And what does that mean? Of course, in order to answer these questions, or at least begin thinking about these questions, we need to get some idea, or at least a rough idea, of what geographic indications are, and why are they arguably so relevant today. So can anyone help me here? So what are geographic indications? Jeremy.
I would say locations of a product to a certain place. Like the exclusive link between a product and a place.
Locations of a product. And there is some kind of link or connection, right?
I would say like the origin.
Origin, okay. Origin is a good term to use. Because what is another field of IP law which also uses the term origin quite often?
Trademark law.
Trademark law. So if we're talking about origin, are we talking necessarily about trademark law? Or is it something different? What do we mean by origin here?
As in where it comes from, like the roots, kind of the way to say it. Like,
Roots. That's not wrong, actually. Roots, where it comes from. Yes?
Say trademarks like dealing to the origin of like a company or logo, while GI is linked to like a location like place.
Here, let's say to a specific source, right? Let's Wixenter. Even though you cannot, or you don't have to name it, you know that a product comes, a specific product branded in a specific way. Say, Coke comes from a specific source. It's one company or someone authorized by said company making Coke. Even though I don't have to know the exact details about this company, that it is also called the Coca-Cola Company, Inc., and whatever else. So it is something for a little bit more specific, whereas, yes, the kind of origin that we're talking about here when it comes to geographical location is a different kind of origin. It's a little bit more fluid, maybe, and it's more related to the origin as in where it comes from, the place it comes from. So yeah, it's more of a geographical origin, as the name itself says. So geography becomes a little bit more relevant than in trademark law. Because Coke can be pretty much manufactured anywhere, right? And if someone has the recipe and the right ingredients, they can make Coke in the UK, as they did, in Brazil, in Mexico, in Germany, and if they want, they can have the same taste. So it doesn't really matter. Whereas, would you guys think that someone can make Bordeaux in Düsseldorf? No. Why is that? What makes Bordeaux different? If I have the recipe, yes?
I would say it's still linked to like the specific environment, like the specific people, like the specific like product, like resources and stuff.
Very good. So specific environment, specific human factors as well, which may be related to that particular geographical location, which may or may not make this product different, right? So whether, how grapes are planted, and when are they actually harvested, the kind of grapes that you're choosing, the way that you're working the grapes, the way they actually produce the wine later at all the stages, the way that you store the wine and so forth, for how long you store the wine. So you do have some kind of human, but also geographically related factors such as weather and the kind of soil and so forth, which may tell us that the kind of wine that you produce in Bordeaux may, even if you follow the same recipe, may not end up being the same kind of wine that you produce in, say, Mendoza or Napa Valley, US, or Argentina. So yes, it is a more geographically related source, and this source tells us still about characteristics or things that we may expect from a product. Very good. Is that all of it then? So why do we think it is important to protect these?
Reputation.
Reputation, okay. In what sense?
A reputation of the goods.
Mm-hmm.
Characteristics.
So
to
can you give one example?
If an operator produces some goods, it should be protected.
Yeah, but you're assuming that just because it exists, it should be protected. That's not necessarily true, is it? Hopefully we need something more than that. Yeah.
Because consumers have they know that like the feta cheese, which is a Greek cheese, if it's not if its location is not protected, I mean that it's a Greek actually, people will think that every feta cheese which is used as an indication for a similar product, it's the same, has the same characteristics, but it's not.
Very good. So this is very interesting because here you're using, and you are not wrong, pretty much a trademark law-like justification in saying, well, it works as a shorthand. It tells consumers what the characteristics of the products are, meaning what they can expect from feta cheese. It has a particular consistency. It has some texture. It is used in some ways for some, and it has a very specific taste. So by seeing feta on product packaging, I have a good idea of what I'm buying, right? So this is the consumer side of it. So expectations of consumers. And this may be as well a very good reason already for us to be protecting this. Meaning say, okay, let's then only allow people to use feta when designating this very specific kind of cheese, which may follow this particular recipe with these characteristics, and the taste is going to be expected to be somewhat like that. But then you would follow that if someone could do exactly the same thing in, say, Spain, they could also call it feta, right? Because you're still telling consumers that it is this particular product with the same characteristics, and you can expect it to taste the same or very much closely to feta cheese from Greece. So why should I allow only feta cheese from Greece to be called feta? Jerry?
Because it would be misleading, because people from like all one would think that cheese comes from Greece, and in reality,
Interesting. So misleading is also a very common concept in trademark law. So we're still thinking in a very trademarky way. And you're right, okay, so consumers may think that any feta must come from Greece. That is a fair assumption. But that is heavily dependent on how consumers see feta as a designation, right? Meaning, essentially, it is a question of consumer expectations. And here, allow me to draw a parallel with last week when we were talking about adding Opel and how German consumers saw toy replicas and what they expected from toy replicas and what is the effect of them seeing the Opel logo in toy replicas and thinking, oh, this is just a toy replica. And how someone in the UK or in Spain may see it differently. So from this perspective, it becomes a much more consumer-based, and someone might even say, passing off unfair competition-based approach to geographic indications. You protect them first as being a designation when it comes to how the product is supposed to be sold, meaning the characteristics of the product. That is one question. The other one, I may even go further in protecting it when it comes to expectations that consumers may have that it comes from this very specific place, say Greece. But that would depend on me looking into market conditions and market positions, saying to some extent that consumers actually make this kind of association, meaning that consumers in the UK actually believe that feta must come from Greece, right? Are you following so far? And what is the problem with this approach? If it is a problem, let's say, what is the shortcoming of this approach then? Yes?
That if the location is not protected, the geographical indication is not protected, there is a free riding problem because people, the UK producers of feta, will actually produce a cheese that is very similar to the Greek one. But of course there is a possibility that they know how to make feta. I mean...
They do.
Yeah.
Not necessarily they will be able to, but they do.
Yeah, but it's the free riding problem.
But I like the free riding point. When we say still, maybe still within trademark law, but not necessarily. So if we think about justifications here more generally, so what is the typical, how would you typically frame free riding or a fair advantage within one of these justifications? So which one you would suit best, you think? Because we need to protect, okay, free riding, we don't like the concept. And as Robbie Jacob would say, we're all against misappropriation as we are in favor of mother and apple pie. It doesn't mean we should actually prohibit it. So how can we justify this kind of additional protection? Because we're moving away from this core zone of more consumer-based protection to something else. And we're saying, oh, thou shalt not take what is mine.
So for example, I have like a different example I had. It's like about champagne.
Yeah.
The Australian example with
Yeah.
champagne. So the city champagne or this region, I don't know what it is to be honest. They produced it. They invested money in the production. They invested money in the reputation. So they put money, like monetary things in it, and they can expect to get their
Some
money
return
back,
to this
some
investment.
return. So if others are free riding or just taking their name and producing the same product in another region or something, they're just stole their investment or used their investment for themselves.
There is a protection of investments. That's very good. Yes. And which one would he? In which box would he put it here? Labor. Exactly. So we have
Only
invested.
labor?
It can be utilitarian.
Yeah.
Very good point. And let's work on that. But let's say the easy one would be labor-based. I've put a lot of effort. I've invested in this. I should be, to some extent, entitled to the returns of my investment. And how can this also be utilitarian? And you're right, it can also be utilitarian. It depends on how you frame your argument. And that's exactly the point. Utilitarian means essentially a more consequentialist discourse, right? You're trying to achieve something. This means to pursue a specific end. So investment is the keyword here. So how can you try to frame this within a labor-based discourse?
It's hard to explain.
Jerry?
Maybe like your returns, like constant returns.
It has something to do with returns or maybe expectations thereof.
I think also welfare. I mean, utilitarian approach is like targeting towards welfare.
Mm-hmm. And how would you put welfare into this equation?
I mean, by others free riding on the product produced by a certain company, you take away their like chance to achieve welfare in like their perspective.
That is actually a very interesting point, which might suggest another justification, which I didn't put here because this is less common, which is what they call social planning is less distributive justice justifications for IP. They're stronger in the US. You see a lot of scholarship on this. And you're right, so you're thinking about welfare in a broader sense of fairness slash restitution, even to use the UK word for it. I mean, that's not really fair. We should try to achieve something more with these. And you can see this when you move away from, especially in the US, when you move away from this more utilitarian mindset.
So they invested and expected reputation to get all of the investment.
Mm-hmm.
So they build up a reputation. It's not only about the labor. It's so I can't lay the finger on it. It's like
the word that you're looking for is incentives.
yeah, okay, yeah.
That is the key word. So you're giving this as incentives to business exploitation slash expenses slash investment. Because I want champagne to be sold not only in France, right? And remember our first seminar, it would be entirely easy for France to say, well, champagne, it's only allowed to be used by producers in Champagne, producing sparkling wine from particular grapes in a very specific way. But do the US need to do this? No, right? Unless they agree that they should both be protecting GIs in the same or in a specific way. And that's why I like your example of Australia, because that also tells us that the dimension of GI may be very different from the dimension of trademark law, because it's not only about protecting the geographic indication within your own country. That obviously is going to be the starting point, but at some point, what you're trying to achieve is mostly exporting products also abroad, as the utilitarian aspect of that. But in order to protect these abroad, and depending on the approach that you take, you may need to come in some kind of arrangement with many other countries. And this is where it gets really interesting, because if we go back to what we're talking about, the different ways of framing protection of geographic indications, if we take the very first one that we were discussing, which is more consumer-based, of course it's going to work perfectly if you're trying to protect, say, feta in Greece, because everyone in Greece is going to be buying feta and expecting that feta comes from Greece. But if you need to ask this question about what consumers see and what do they expect from the designation, do you think that necessarily, hypothetically speaking, Australians would think that feta comes or must come from Greece? That is a question that you cannot answer a priori, is it? And you don't really know the answer to it, do you? Unless you start asking.
It depends on what Australia. I mean, the question is if Australians want feta to come from Greece. I mean, what is the actual question? I mean,
Exactly. What is the actual question? So let's frame a question. So how would you try to protect this? If you need to show and if you need to go to court in Australia and this is protected as something like underpassing off, and you're defending the interests of the Association of Producers of Feta in Greece, and you need to show that producers doing the same thing in Australia, not the same, but following the same recipe and calling the product, their products feta in Australia are not doing it right. So how do you show this? How can you show that consumers will think something different?
I mean, how they see it, you can do like surveys with the consumers, how they see feta. If they're just seeing like the product characteristics, or if they actually see like the origin of the product.
Very good, but you need to start asking questions, right?
Yeah.
You don't have this same assumption that you get from, say, trademark registration, where you say, oh, my trademark is registered, so I'm assuming. You pretty much reverse the burden, right? I don't know, Bill, think. I have the logo which is registered for toys. So my assumption is that consumers will actually be misled when this same logo is being used by someone else. But you reverse the burden, and then the defendants had to show that, well, actually, no, the way the consumers behave on the market in Germany is that. It's very different. Whereas actually here, if you do use this more passing off of fair competition approach, the burden is falling on you, the claimant, to show that consumers actually believe not only that feta is a specific kind of product with some characteristics, but that anyone using feta is telling Australian consumers that that their product comes from Greece. So do you think this is something that someone who never sold their product in a given country is able to establish on the outside? Feta has never been sold in Australia before. Is anyone able to show this easily?
I doubt that because there are many Greeks in Australia. I mean, for
It's
sure.
a hypothetical. Let's pick a country where there are not as many Greeks. Let's say Vietnam, I assume.
I would say no, unless they like show on their like packages that like come from Greece, like, introduce that product.
Yeah, very good. So no, unless there was some kind of reputational link. So let's say, for the sake of the argument, because there has been some kind of advertising, or because Feta came to be very popular in a given U.S. TV show. So everyone knows because they have been watching this TV show that there is a thing called Feta, which happens to be a specific kind of cheese coming from Greece. But otherwise, what normally would need to happen is that consumers need to get in contact with this product. They need to know this product so they can actually construe or build some kind of expectation when it comes to this kind of product. So if you haven't really sold this product before, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to achieve this. So maybe not the best kind of incentive if we're thinking in a more utilitarian way, right? Whereas if we're thinking labor-based terms, we'll also mean, well, if you have not invested here yet, why should I actually give you something for it? This is just to give you guys an idea that depending on how you frame your discourse and depending on the kind of perspective or justification that you use, you may actually get away with anything, really, in IP. You can justify different choices. And different, especially for as far as we are concerned today, different levels of protection as well. So when it comes to GIs, we do have also some very specific or more specific justifications, which may not necessarily fit this framework here of classical justifications for IP. First one is exactly one that we have been talking about, which is more informational function of telling consumers what a product is and what to ensure that they get what they want. But there's also this other more incentive-based, which has much to do with local and rural development. Because which kind of products are usually protected by geographical indications, or where geography becomes more relevant? Agricultural products, foodstuffs, wines and spirits. But it is very much agriculture based. It's not, you're not necessarily dismissing other kinds, but historically it has always been built around these kind of very specific products. You don't need to give a geographical indication for Coca-Cola, or put it in a better way, for cola-based soft drinks made in the US or coming from the US. Because you pretty much can do the same thing elsewhere, as Coca-Cola actually does, or as Pepsi also does. So this is our backdrop, and there is also evidence studying, and you guys can make your own judgment on this, that for example, when you have a particular region, and often, once this region is actually recognized by having products associated with a specific geographical indication, land in this particular region actually gets valued, gets more value in a very considerable way. And you may think this, and there is a causal link. I mean, that once there, some piece of property which has some connection with geographical indications actually has more value than others, irrespective of objective quality. This is very clear when it comes to wine, for example. If we think about French wine, some very specific designations actually are worth much more than others, even though when it comes to quality, that doesn't necessarily mean much. There is a famous movie, I forgot the name now, which is about, it's actually based on a true story, and it's about the blind testing between wines which came from the US and which came from France. And they were blind testing all the wines, one of those famous contests like the best wine in the world, and yada yada yada. They were all blind testing all the wines, and they had all the most famous French and Italian wines, such as Petrus and that kind of stuff. But they also happened to have one from Napa Valley, and Napa Valley actually won. So, and it became quite a big fuss. That was a few decades ago, but that's what made New World wines, as we call them, US, Chile, Argentina, Australia, much more famous and more highly regarded, because the US with the Napa Valley wine was able to beat the most expensive and most famous wines in blind testing. So that also tells us that the idea that we have of quality when it comes to geographical indications might be a little bit different than just tasting better or being necessarily a better product. It's more about expectations. And of course, we can always ask the question, so would you pay more for Parma ham instead of Tesco everyday value ham? And why is that?
Prestige.
Prestige, yeah. What else? I'm not saying that Tesco everyday value tastes better, it probably doesn't. But it is cheaper, isn't it?
Because Parma ham has probably a longer history.
Ah, very good. It has been there for centuries, if not more. And it has been produced in a very particular, in a very specific way, right? And we assume that this way hasn't changed much, if at all. So there's also the issue of traditional knowledge here. This is another aspect which is very important when it comes to this kind of designations, which is we give incentives not only to protect them as such, but also to value the kind of traditional knowledge that was built around them. Parma ham, I think, is actually dated back to the Roman period, actually. We can go through the specification later, and that's an interesting point. But, meaning, they have been doing the same thing for centuries, and this is one incentive to allow them to keep doing this, or at least not changing it, what it is in, say, Italy's interest as a cultural society to keep doing things in the same way. So there is a lot of weight being put to this traditional knowledge of doing things which are just tradition and preserving these kind of traditions. Because it means that if someone else is doing something differently, even within Italy, even if they are in the Parma region in Italy, they cannot use Parma ham unless they're actually following the recipe in the very precise way. So there is also this cultural heritage / traditional knowledge aspect of geographical indications. And the risk is just what we call genericide, which is the obverse of this. It means essentially that, and you guys have rated this already, if someone is allowed to use feta without it following the recipe, without it being from Greece, then of course, after a given time, it may be 5 years, it may be 10, 20, but after a given time, consumers' expectations will actually change. And that will mean eventually that feta may no longer designate or may no longer work as a designation for this very specific kind of cheese coming from Greece. It may become just this very specific kind of cheese, maybe not even that. So when it comes to Greece's interests as a country, or the interests of this particular group of producers doing this thing in Greece, they may be actually harmed. So just as a reference, the key point that we were looking for when we were discussing this kind of link, this kind of connection, is what is called terroir. And that comes from wine. And if you guys like wine or like to be obnoxious about wine, there's a lot of stuff on this. And it is quite interesting. Because yes, there are many natural factors which may influence how a product actually tastes or how it actually is. And this is the key point, and this is intrinsically linked to the justifications, or at least the traditional justifications for geographical indications. And here we have a few examples. Cuban cigar, Parma ham, champagne, Darjeeling tea, camembert. And I suppose that most, if not a lot of you, will already make a few connections when you see any of these products, right? And if not, maybe only reputational. Well, Cuban cigars are quite famous, and people actually, they're known to be very good. Are they different from Dominican Republic cigars? I'm not sure. But they're Cuban cigars. And you're not allowed to sell them in the US, for example.
Yeah, I have a question. Except these foods affected by different geographical climates, can some non-cultural heritage apply for the protection too?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, so do you mean, can I have a GI which does not necessarily draw on some kind of traditional knowledge or cultural heritage? The answer is yes, I'm getting there, because this is a subset or a specific kind of geographic indication. But what you need for some kinds of geographic indications today is just reputation. Meaning, if the place became famous for providing this kind of product. And that also raises questions if we're thinking about why we're giving GIs. But let me park this one, and I think it's actually going to be, not in 2 or 3 slides we're going to be talking about this in more detail, but good question, yes, you're right. But yeah, so pick up on that. So Cuban cigars, I don't know if there's something different about the weather in Cuba, which makes it different, but I do know that they have a reputation for being very good cigars. So the international framework, and here we're talking about how important it is that we think about multilateral solutions for this, because as a country, you want to protect your geographical indications elsewhere, maybe more than even within your country. Then we have TRIPS, of course. In Article 22 and 23 are our key provisions here. Where they say essentially that GIs are indications which identify a good as originating in the territory of a member. So you guys were right, origin is the term to use. And yes, territoriality is the key issue here. Or region or locality in that territory, where given quality, reputation, or other characteristic of the good is essentially attributable to its geographical origin. Meaning it can be only reputation, but it also can be quality, reputation, just quality, or quality, reputation, or something else. And this is a very specific provision that you guys should have in mind, which is the enhanced protection for wine and spirits. And this sets much of the contemporary debates that we have in geographic indications today, which is one of scope of protection. So what does this mean, and what does the TRIPS agreement tell us here? Essentially, it's telling us that when you're using a designation which is recognized as being a geographic indication in relation to wines or spirits, you're not allowed to use it on the label unless you're actually qualified or allowed to use this indication. That's why it's saying that translated expressions or accompanied by terms such as kind, title, style, imitation, or the like are not allowed. Which also means that if you're not dealing with wines and spirits on the TRIPS, you're actually allowed to use something like in the style of Camembert. Which means technically that you're not using the GI Camembert, you're actually referring to the GI Camembert to sell your own product. And why would someone do this? Why would someone want to use, why would Tesco, when selling their, hypothetically speaking, when selling their everyday value ham, would like to use, I'm not saying that they can use, because we will get there, but why would they like to use Parma style ham? What is it?
Because everyone would assume that's like Parma ham, just like cheaper.
Ah.
Probably.
And but what do you mean by everyone will assume that it is Parma
I mean,
ham?
everyone who ate like Parma ham before and was like really convinced of the quality or like the product characteristics would see, oh, it's like Parma ham, so why not get like a cheaper version of it?
Ah, very good. So very interesting point to make here. It is like what, or it is Parma ham. Because depending on what consumers are actually thinking, this may change things dramatically, right? Because what is the difference between of consumers thinking it is like Parma ham or it is Parma ham?
Like, Parma ham is like exactly the same, and like Parma ham is just like maybe one ingredient is different, maybe like different seasoning or I don't know.
But it's not really necessarily the same thing, right?
Yes.
Jerry, you wanted to add something?
Like there was this case with the Greek yogurt. We had
Exactly.
the expectation that it was Greek and then there was the Greek style.
Yeah.
So I think like it's not exactly the same. And say the Greek style hits the expectation.
So the idea of you're right, and we will, if we have the time, we will actually discuss the Greek yogurt case, and I think we'll do have time. But the point here is that we go back again to the more consumer-based kind of protection, because what we're saying is that as long as consumers are not misled into thinking that Tesco Parma ham style or Parma style ham is actually Parma ham, the Parma ham coming from Italy, that's fine. Whereas if they think that the Parma style ham is actually the same thing or necessarily the Parma ham, there is some confusion. So the test here is that for other products, here you assume you just rule out in a very property-based kind of approach, saying that you're not allowed to use like, style, or whatever thing in that set. Whereas in relation to other products, you need to ask this question, essentially. Are consumers getting confused or no? And this becomes your threshold question, meaning that GIs within that context are only protected insofar as consumers are actually being confused, regardless or not about the use of the like or style or whatever else information.
I mean, in order to get confused, they have to know the characteristics, which is like mostly a problem because they don't know like the heritage and how it used to be made.
Exactly. So this is the passing off question about, so what is the product and what consumers think the product is, and to what extent, how much in detail should we get? So should we know that Greek yogurt is actually strained in a very particular way, and it doesn't matter if consumers don't really know this. And so what are we actually protecting? And yes, that's a very good point. You say that maybe the passing off from fair competition-like approach is not the best when it comes to protecting cultural heritage. Because if you need to ask this question, or maybe if it's not even the question that you're asking, when litigating this in court, then maybe yes. Someone else want to say something? Okay. Just another reminder, we discussed this one in our first seminar, the WTA case, EC, European Community case, trademarks and geographical indications, where under the previous regulation, which is no longer in force, the EU required that in order for foreign GIs to be protected within the EU, the country of origin had to adopt the same or equivalent GI system. And that was held to be in breach of national treatment, meaning that they were treating their own national treatment from nationals from other countries such as US, Australia, and so forth. And one would say maybe that's one of the reasons why there's not much uniformity when it comes to the very different approaches that countries are taking to GIs. Because one would think, well, if the outcome was different, what would the US need to do in order to have Napa Valley protected as a geographical indication in the EU? Yeah.
You like adopt?
They would have to adopt the same system. Right? So given that the EU is arguably not the first, the second largest market in the world, how many countries would be willing to do that? A lot, right? So it would push harmonization in a way that probably we would be arriving today in a very different international landscape. But now think about from the producer's side of things, what is the problem in countries having different approaches to GIs? Let's say you're a producer from Bordeaux and you want to export wines, or you're actually the association of wine producers in Bordeaux, and you need to cater for the interests of your associates or affiliates.
Let's say the same thing again, like you have to adopt to different regimes which cost like a lot of money.
Very good. So transaction costs. If you need to be familiar with just one regime, that's one thing. If you need to be familiar with two, that's already going to be a little bit more expensive because you need to get in touch with lawyers. You probably will need to get through a different procedure, assuming that you can actually qualify under this procedure. And if you're dealing with potentially 20 or 50 different systems, it's insane. So that is essentially what drives harmonization. Pretty much any kind of harmonization really is essentially reducing transaction costs. You use economic jargon, essentially. Because when we think about costs, it's always important to think how do they affect people and companies, essentially. So let's think about wine producers from Bordeaux. If we think about costs, let's say the one producing Chateau Lafite probably wouldn't be that worse off. They do have the resources. They're probably one of the most famous brands of wine. But who else is producing wine as well? Smaller producers as well, right? So there's always this equitable or non-equitable aspect of cost, which means that they tend to transaction costs and this kind of administrative bureaucratic costs tend to impose a higher burden, or heavier burden, sorry, on SMEs, small and medium businesses, essentially. And wine producers, or even agricultural producers, this is a context where it becomes far more evident because you have also small farmers or medium-sized farmers and that kind of thing, medium-sized, medium producers. That's also one of the reasons why potentially GI is best addressed as a collective endeavor, because then all of them get to chip in, the producer of Chateau Lafite, but also the other producers, they all joint efforts. Now, briefly, before we take our break, about the EU scheme, we do have today this regulation which deals with agricultural products and foodstuffs. For our purposes here, the most relevant ones are these that I put here. Protected designation of origin, protected geographic indication, and provisional specialty guaranteed. Protected, it gets the P just because it is registered. Because the concept itself is essentially designation of origin, geographical indication, and provisional specialty guaranteed. And you get to use these labels here. So if you guys see these in the supermarkets, now you know what they potentially mean, or you will soon know what they potentially mean. So, designation of origin, it is, think about, we are talking about names here such as Feta, Champagne, Camembert, and that kind of stuff. This is our backdrop, so when we talk about a name, it's that kind of name. It's not really a trademark. So a geographical name, the designation of origin is a name which identifies a product originating in a specific place, region, or even a country, whose quality or characteristics are essentially or exclusively due to a particular geographical environment. So remember what we were talking about. It's because of natural factors, the terroir, in that particular region, which may or may not make the product different. Like Bordeaux may taste different from the same kind of wine being produced in Argentina. Again, with its inherent natural, those factors, weather, climate, microclimate, and that kind of thing, and also human factors, the way that it is produced, broadly speaking. And also the production steps, and this is very important, which all take place in the defined geographical area, meaning everything is done there. Everything is in-house. Which may also mean, okay, so wait, there are designations of origin in geographical indications where the product is not entirely made in the area? Yes, they are. And these are called geographical indications, which I know is fairly counterintuitive because we were talking about geographical indications. So try not to confuse geographical indications, the gender, when it's used to, broadly speaking, when it's used to refer to any kind of geographical indications, to this very specific kind of geographical indications. So this is a geographical indication that is being referred here. It's a subset. It is a geographical indication in the strict sense. The PGI, protected geographical indication. And as you see, the requirements are a little bit more lenient than for the designation of origin. So the designation of origin is the more specific, the stronger designation, whereas this one, originating in a specific place, region, or country, whose quality, reputation, or other characteristics is essentially attributable to its geographical origin, and at least one of the production steps takes place within the area. Meaning that depending on what the kind of thing that you're doing, if the last step takes place there, but that place is famous for it, that might be enough. Can anyone think of one example here? So, Swiss watches.
Maybe like Apple, when they produce like some parts of the phones like in California, but the rest be like in China.
Yeah, but that's assuming there is some kind of geographical indication relating to Apple does, what Apple does, which in this case there's not. But your thinking is absolutely right. So if you think about Swiss watches, it means that essentially Swiss watches can use 80%, if not more, of the components from elsewhere, which may be, say, from Taiwan, from Germany, from Vietnam, from China.
What's the question? Sorry.
We're past the question already.
No, the question you just said.
Exactly, we're past it already.
Oh, okay.
I don't even remember what was the question. Oh, yeah. Can you have one example? So I'm giving you the example, sorry, of Swiss-made watches, which essentially, if you think about it, I can see here, right? Paragraph C. At least one of the production steps takes place within the area. One example is Swiss watches.
Yeah, I wanted to add an example. Panama hats. They're from Ecuador, Monte Cristo.
Oh, very good. So there you go. Panama hats. Panama hats are quite
Not
famous.
from Panama, they're from Ecuador. Everyone thinks it's from Panama, but they're...
Oh, but then it may not be a geographical indication.
No, it is. That's what I'm telling you. You can everyone can search it. It is a geographical indication, and they're from Monte Cristo. But if you put Panama hat right now, you're gonna look in the internet. It's gonna say that it's originated from Ecuador, and there's the only, if you buy a Panama hat and it's not from Ecuador, it's not Panama hat. That's the name.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But then you might also say that it has become generic. That's the risk of genericide to just designate a specific kind of hat, regardless of where it's made from. We can do something here.
No, it's not. I'm sorry. It's not regarding to where it's made from.
Let's see if it is registered in
Yeah.
the EU. I put the link on Moodle, which is essentially, no, it's not registered in the EU.
Well, but can you put just Panama hat in upstairs?
I'm sure it's going to get a lot of links from many different places, including Amazon, potentially.
Bullshit.
Yeah.
Just put the. No, not that. Just put the search, not the.
Also known as Ecuadorian hat. There you go.
Just back home, it is registered as a.
But that's a very good point. That's what's the point that I was talking about. Well, it may be registered back home, but then you're only protecting this within your own country, right? You need this to be recognized elsewhere in order for you to enforce this.
Well, I think also in the Andean community.
Okay, so within the Andean community,
it
is protected. But if you want to protect this within the EU, you would have to have registered this here. And I'm going to use this later in the second part of our class as a more practical example.
Maybe because that's agriculture and rural, so we probably won't be registered there.
But this is the only quality scheme that we have, which is EU-wide, other than wines and spirits.
Yeah.
You're right. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's fine. But
let me take a look later. I'm
interested in they're pretty famous.
Yeah, let me do some research on them before I say something silly.
It's fine.
But I find it amusing just because if it is actually Panama hat, not from Panama.
Yeah, I know
being protected as a GI, because that would counter pretty much most expectations.
Yeah.
But let's assume for the sake of that, yes, if it is made elsewhere, but the last step would have to take place within Panama. It's probably to be Panama hat, but you're right. You say this doesn't fall within the scope of this particular regulation. And for that, we also have the traditional specialty guarantee, which is the TSG, which is regardless of actual geographical location, is more about traditional knowledge, and essentially safeguard traditional methods of production and recipes which have a value-adding attribute. So it's a very particular way of making something which became famous. And you guys will see what I mean when you see these examples. So two examples of traditional specialties guarantee are jamón serrano and pizza napoletana. So they're not PGIs or PDOs because they are not really necessarily linked to one particular geographical location, even though the products tend to come from one very specific region in Spain, or it's in Napolitan, you wouldn't expect them to be in the particular region of Italy. But the point here is that it can be done elsewhere in the EU as long as you follow the recipe. There's more of a traditional knowledge concern here. So you can make pizza napoletana TSG in Glasgow if you want to, as long as you follow the recipe. And if you guys see the label pizza napoletana TSG with this kind of stuff, the last one, that means that is the authentic pizza napoletana is made by Italians since ever, I suppose. Jamón serrano is the same thing. However, the others are different. So designations of origin: Comté cheese for France, prosciutto di Parma from Italy, and native Shetland wool. Shetland is an island in Scotland, not really that far away from here. Burrata di Andria is just a geographical indication, which means there may not be a very specific human or natural factor which leads to this particular product. It may be only about reputation. And I want to go through these in a little bit more detail, but let's just take a 5-minute break, not too long a break, so we can also hopefully try to finish before 1, sorry. So this is what you see on the register, essentially, when you have the geographic indication, which is registered. In this case here, we have a PDO from the UK for white Stilton cheese and blue Stilton cheese. When they're registered, you actually see all these details on the EU register, which you can actually. I put the link on Moodle if you guys want to don't have anything better to do and want to spend some time using it. But essentially, this is the search tool where you can find which geographical indications have been registered or applied for in the EU, again, in relation to agricultural products and foodstuffs. So let's do something interesting. So let's say feta, which has been our main example today. There you go. I don't read this, but this one is feta from Greece.
Yeah, it says feta.
It's small, isn't it? It's a lot. There's a lot of Greek, as you see.
Yeah. There are just.
But you know it is registered. But what matters here, if you don't,
addresses.
a lot of people.
Sorry, it's just addresses.
I know. I can tell that. But that's what matters. So you see us here also the publications, and usually you see a translation, hopefully in your own language or the one that you can speak, with a summary, and then you see like something like this. Or maybe not. Oh, there you go. So as you see the details here, let me try to zoom this. Oh, there you go. So, as you see, the geographical zone in which the milk is produced, from which feta cheese is made, is defined by the administrative boundaries of the following areas. And then you see the geographical sections. And I'm sure some of you, or at least one of you, will be familiar with things like this. And then it is prohibited to use milk from areas other than these, for example, in the preparation of food. They're all local regions, as you see. And then you see a lot of explaining happening, essentially. How it is made, what is the history behind it, and so forth. The physical conditions, the climate. specific, and so forth. So what I did actually, is that I put a Moodle as well. And this is entirely optional, it's just if you guys are curious enough or keen enough. But you see the same on Moodle. I've put a few examples of specifications of geographic indications if you guys want to have a look later. Where, for example, you have Jamón Serrano, which is very interesting, which is one of the traditional specialties guaranteed. And then you see how it's actually a recipe. So you see tabular product, meat products, and then the specification you see it's produced using traditional methods. The ham is first salted for a period between X and yada yada days. And how it is cured in the traditional character, how it works. Dates back to the Roman times, 2nd century before Christ, so fairly old. And description of the product, what do you expect from it. It is essentially a recipe. We're talking about recipe, it's really good. So if you want to make yourself your own authentic Napolitan pizza, you have the recipe as well. And I'm giving this to you, so good luck. Tell me how it works, post pictures on Instagram maybe. But here, you have all the specifications, which is just fascinating if you think about it. Pizza Napolitana TSG is a round product baked in the oven with a diameter not exceeding 35 centimeters. How thick it is supposed to be. It must be tender, elastic, and easily folded. How the baking process works. You need to use mozzarella di bufala campagna, which happens to be another indication of geographical indication. There you go. How the flour, the characteristics of the flour. So it's a very specific recipe. So if you have the time, maybe if you want to go into cooking or whatever, have fun. But that illustrates as well how GIs work as well, because the idea, and here we were talking about the informational function, so we do have a register in this kind of GIs, which is being very specific, but it's also giving two different kinds of information. One, what your geographic indication is about, and more importantly, who's allowed to use it, and obviously, by extension, who's not allowed to use it. So stay away from here, kind of thing. Who's allowed to use it is essentially anyone who happens to be, say, when it is a designation of origin, this is the relevance here. So say I buy a piece of land in Greece, and my piece of land happens to be in one of these regions here. I want to produce feta cheese, so how do I do it? I take the recipe from here, yay! And by just following the exact same production method, and being within this specified region, I'm allowed to use then the label, the indication, and whatever else. Means it is open in this sense, more democratic in this sense, to the extent that I don't really need to seek permission from anyone as long as I am entitled, as long as I fit within the specification. So I can, if I had the means, I could be next week producing Bordeaux wine in Bordeaux and calling it Bordeaux, as long as I bought a piece of land and I had vast amounts of money to invest in produce following the recipe. But there you go. Regardless of me being Brazilian and never being in France before, at least not living in Bordeaux, doesn't matter. So that was the more practical aspect of that. And you can spend some time if you want to later. So talking about cases now, two very specific cases that I wanted to briefly discuss with you. First one, this is not on the reading list, so I'm mostly going through it with you, which is the Parma ham case. And there was a case in the UK which went to the House of Lords. House of Lords, if you're not familiar with it, yes, it is the upper chamber of the legislature, but it also was, until 2009, the highest court in the country, because there was what we called the appeal section of the House of Lords, which was essentially a tribunal which within the House of Lords, with appointed judges, not legislators, who were the highest court in the UK. So until 2009, and that's why you have so many cases going to the House of Lords. That was our version of the UK Supreme Court, and now since 2009, we do have the UK Supreme Court. So this case went to the highest appeal court in the UK. And the point here is essentially, you guys have seen the Parma hen, or at least you know that it is registered as a designation of origin, so something more specific. Not only has to be produced or it has to come from Parma, but it has to be produced according to a very specific set of instructions, right? And what Italy did when they came up with this particular GI was that you can sell a Parma ham in two ways. One, by just having the entire piece of ham, and you buy a piece of ham and you take it out with you and be happy. Or you can sell it sliced in packaging. But if that is your choice, all this slicing and packaging and labeling needs to be done in Italy. So if you guys remember, what I see here, all production steps need to take place within the geographical area, and Italy is essentially arguing that slicing and packaging with subsequent labeling is one of said production steps. ASDA, which you probably are familiar with, is a low cost, I want to say, supermarket chain in the UK. And what they used to do, or what they were doing at least, was that they were buying entire pieces of Parma ham. So it was actually genuine Parma ham, sourced from one of the main producers in Italy. And then they got the entire pieces, and then they brought this to their facilities in the UK, and that's where they would slice and package all the ham that would go to their stores. The point in doing this is that, well, it would become cheaper. And they are aiming at a very specific section of the UK consuming public. So they would be able to sell authentic, and it is really authentic, Parma ham cheaper. Association of Parma ham producers took issue and brought a infringement claim here in the UK. You guys already can guess that it was controversial given that it went up to the House of Lords. So let's think here briefly. Why would Italy be interested in putting as one of the production steps slicing and packaging?
Because it might have an impact on the quality of the product.
Very good. Anything else, Jeremy?
Because then you can label stuff like that.
Very good. So ensuring what quality, because you're ensuring that the kind of packaging that you're going to be using is going to be able to conserve all the characteristics that you want when it's going to be traveling, say. And also labeling, make sure that you label it and then it comes out from your place with the right labels and everything else. So consumers do have an expectation that they get the real thing. And Lord Hoffman actually agreed with you both. That was essentially the point that he made at the House of Lords, saying that essentially it is a means to guarantee that whatever went into packaging was essentially the real thing. Because otherwise there would be no control from producers from Italy as to whether ASA was actually using the right kind of hand or slicing it in the right way. And then when they did their own packaging and subsequent labeling, what could be any other reason for this, potentially? Thinking from ASDA's side. Why do you would prefer to sell Parma ham instead of ASDA everyday value ham?
I would say again, reputation.
Reputation, yes. And reputation usually allows you to charge more. So also one of the points that was being made that by doing this, the producers would have more control over the price that they can set. Because then us that would not be, or their owners would not be allowed to pursue this kind of strategy, such as let me do this licensing myself because it's going to be cheaper, then I'm going to be having it cheaper. So it's also about keeping the value high and charging a premium price and enforcing this price while retaining control over as many steps of the production chain as you can, even if it goes into something which arguably, if you think about it literally, the ham has been produced already. It's not like the ham slice is going to be different from the ham, which is just the entire piece. But there's also the packaging. And the packaging point also becomes a little bit more persuasive if you guys think about different products such as wine and how wine is transported, for example. So that's why also wine tends to be bottled within the same place of production. Also, the last point I was going to make, because then, which is a very practical point, it would be easier, or at least the association from Italy would not have to bother as much with monitoring to find out which kind of package Parma ham would actually be Parma ham, and which kind would just have the label without being Parma ham, meaning a supermarket chain sourcing Parma ham from elsewhere. Not Parma ham from elsewhere and calling it Parma ham. So also reducing monitoring and enforcement costs. Because they wouldn't have to monitor because they knew that everything that came out had to come out packaged else from Italy. Now finally, the last one here. The Greek yogurt case. And this one hopefully, because it was on the list, during the rest, the essential reading nonetheless, we get to talk a little bit more about this. Just disclaimer, not all the pictures actually from the UK, but that's the point. So, would anyone like to have a go at this one? So what happened in this case? Yes, Jeremy.
There was a Greek producer, Peja, that produced yogurt with Greek yogurt label in the UK. And then there was an American producer who did the same. And essentially, the first producer made an injunction against America.
Mm-hmm. And what was the outcome?
The outcome was that they won because there was like a customer expectation for Greek yogurt. When the label says Greek yogurt, that's actually corn grease, and that's like the quality of it.
Very good. So let's think. Remember how we were talking about from quite a long time about feta? So instead of feta, Greek yogurt. So let's stop this. Is it the same thing though? First question that I would ask. So what do you guys think of feta? Okay, I think we can all reasonably assume for the sake of our discussion that feta is a very specific kind of cheese which comes from Greece. But what about Greek yogurt? And let's take profit from the fact that we all come from very different places. So using your very own experiences, don't be necessarily UK based. What do you actually think when you are in your own country in the supermarket and you see something like Greek yogurt?
It has to be like creamy in the texture.
Okay, it has a particular texture. So we're still talking about quality as referred to characteristics and things that you expected, except from yogurt. So it's different from this plain yogurt, and it usually has a different texture. Yes?
I think just by the name, because when you have like the name is just feta and then the other is just Greek yogurt. So even if I'm from like another country, then I would expect like it has some association.
Okay, so there is reference to a country as opposed to just feta. So that may create by itself, by someone reading it, some expectation that it either comes from Greece or has something to do with Greece. Anyone else? Why do you buy Greek yogurt?
It's supposed to be healthier.
It's supposed to be healthier, so it's still about the characteristics. And that's the astonishing thing when you read about when you read the judgment, because you realize that there are different ways of making Greek yogurt and Greek style yogurt. And you realize that by reading the judgment only, you realize that the Greek style yogurt may not be as healthy because of how the yogurt is being strained. Fascinating stuff, really. But that's how a passing off action gets to be, isn't it? Because what was the cause of action here? So what was this being litigated under? Was it under a PDO? Not really, right? Why wasn't this being registered as a geographic indication? So is Greek yogurt called Greek yogurt in Greece?
No. Actually, I didn't know that there were other yogurts. My friend told me.
Fair
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah, but actually, there are many qualities of yogurt in Greece as well. There are the more traditional ones that are actually from the package. You understand that there are more traditional, and the more commercial ones. That's all.
Yes, but you don't really have Greek yogurt in Greece, do you?
It's just
We call
yogurt.
that such.
It's just yogurt.
Yeah, exactly. So the point is that it wasn't really a geographic indication within Greece, even though elsewhere everyone actually associated this particular kind of yogurt with Greece to some large extent. So that's why it wasn't a GI, because it wasn't a GI in the country of origin in the first place. So it was something else. So what was the claim here? What was the claimant arguing instead of infringement of a registered geographical indication? Yes?
I think it was goodwill.
Goodwill is one of the requirements that they had to meet, because that was an action for
So maybe passing off.
passing off. So it was extended passing off. That's what we call it. And as we were discussing, so passing off is actually a different rationale from registration for a geographical indication, and we get to ask more questions, which is one of the points of this case. And it is the typical UK approach. We do have the law of passing off, which is a tort, meaning in this case law-based. It is not statutory law. It doesn't derive from the Trademarks Act or anything like that. And it is heavily reliant on specific requirements, which include goodwill, but also misrepresentation and damage. And it is a more market-based approach, and you're more concerned because of these questions with how consumers see and react to this particular indication. So Greek yogurt, is there goodwill in Greek yogurt? How do we know that?
It depends on the customers, like customer expectations.
Wait a minute, so it depends, our benchmark is the relevant public, meaning the consumers of this particular product. And what would be the questions that we should be asking here then? Think about the first part of the seminar and what we discussed. For there to be a goodwill in the use of the indication Greek yogurt,
I would say the same thing as the whole case, like how long has been the product, like how long was the product in the market, and how long were the customers.
very good. So some factors of how long your product has been available. But I would say a little bit more than that, especially one meaning consumers actually attach to this word, meaning when they see Greek yogurt, what do they actually think? And what do they actually expect from it? Meaning, is it actually identifying a specific class of products? Is Greek yogurt different from yogurt? And do consumers actually apprehend this? And how much they actually apprehend of this? So they actually go into detail, or they actually are thinking more broadly that it's just different. It's a kind of yogurt that I actually like, which I know is different from plain yogurt. Or do they actually need to know that it is being strained in a very particular way without the use of additives? So this is the first question, the question of goodwill. So is there a class of products? It is identifiable with sufficient precision. What does that mean, and how do consumers apprehend this, if at all? And then we have the other one, misrepresentation. And what does that mean? So the question here is essentially, is the defendant, by using the same Greek yogurt designation, misleading consumers as to the characteristics of the product? Is there confusion here? And let me ask you then, were the products from both parties made in the same way? In the exact same way? Yeah.
I think that doesn't matter. I think it matters like how people view it, and like for example in that case there were like more than 50% of the people thought it was good.
That is true. It depends on how they see it. But if you use the same product, it doesn't really matter that much, right? Because the point here is that what were they seeing when they saw Greek yogurt? And this is the geographical point. Yeah.
Was from Greece.
There was some Greece. Again, this is the expectation. So, and the other product was actually from the US. So this is the misrepresentation point, essentially, in saying that, well, by seeing Greek yogurt, the UK, and this is the UK question, consumers actually think that it comes or it must come from Greece, whereas the product came from the US. And as you guys can think, this also becomes quite costly. It's not everyone that can litigate this kind of case and produce this kind of evidence. If you guys want to know more about extended passing off, this is a good case, which I haven't really listed, but I also put the other case, the interesting one as well, which is the vodka case, where they have a very good, interesting summary of going through the main cases dealing with extended passing off in the UK, such as Spanish champagne, British sherry, and those cases. So if you guys like the topic, that's some good reading as well. My last point for today, in the US, they use another different approach, which is of protecting GIs as certification marks. So it is essentially trademark law. And a few examples. Roquefort is a certification mark, but certification mark doesn't have to be just necessarily a GI or just necessarily limited to some kind of territory. So something which would be closer to the traditional special status guarantee, meaning a recipe or way to make a product, is the OU kosher certification mark for kosher products, which, as you probably or may be familiar with, are products produced in a very specific religious way, so they can conform just not only Jewish, but they can also be consumed by other religions as well, because they conform very some overlap. So, but you can also see the relevance of this kind of certification mark when it is on any products that you find in a store or supermarket, which means that people from a very particular religion are allowed to consume these products and do not need to worry about the way they have such products have been produced and so forth. So this is just to give you guys some context that you can read later about the OU kosher mark, which is this label. It's just a U within a circle. And Swiss made for watches is also a mark. And one of the controversial arguably points is essentially that it only requires the goods to come from Switzerland, which means that if you use all components from elsewhere, but just assemble everything in Switzerland, it can still be a Swiss-made watch. So that may also call into question many of our assumptions when it comes to the quality, or at least quality in the sense of expectations of this product, because if consumers expect them to actually be entirely manufactured in a place, meaning all the components are sourced from the place, depending on the kind of geographic indication, that's not entirely true. And this is what essentially sets much of the tone when it comes to, as well, one of the key debates, which is the extension of Article 23 from wines and spirits to everything. And for this last bit, I will direct you to another very good piece of reading, this one on the further reading list, which is the Ganji's chapter 6 of his book, which if you guys like this whole justifications discussion and how to frame a particular concept within very different justifications, and how far they are allowed to take you, and how you can base your decisions based on that, that is probably one of the best pieces when it comes to doing this kind of thing, because he does it quite well. And that's all for today, actually. I was able to finish this a bit early.